And welcome to the data-driven approach to digital transformation in corporate legal teams. And effectively, we have a little tagline there: in results we trust, brought to you by Contract Pod AI and hosted by Cosmonauts. So thank you everybody for joining us. And we will get started promptly, as I think we are 2 minutes over, and we were just giving everybody an opportunity to join the meeting before getting moving. So with us today, let me just start off with the panelists who are going to be speaking. So I guess I'll start. I am Charles Demov. I'm the Vice President of Global Marketing here at Contract Pod AI. In Contract Pod AI, basically we create a CLM, a Contract Lifecycle Management System, with what we are very proud to call the 5 Ds of AI, so 5 dimensions of AI. In any case, I won't talk further about that. With that, let me pass it over to George. George, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So my name is George Barlow. I'm the Associate Director of Legal Engineering at Contract Pod AI. I've been with Contract Pod for just about a year now, and prior to that, I was a Senior In-house Counsel at Aviva PLC for about 16 years.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Jerry, can I ask you to introduce yourself? Thank you, George.
Hi, I'm Jerry Levine. I'm the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary of what is now Amelia, an IPsoft company. I've been here for about 5 years, and I'm happy to share our parts of our journey and talk about digital transformation.
Fantastic, thank you. We're excited to hear about that. And Ben, can you introduce yourself as well, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Ben Chilito. I'm now head of legal at Fujitsu UK, and I run our global legal services team, which is an offshore team of lawyers and technology and operations specialists who support Fujitsu's global legal and commercial operations. All
right. So we've got a good, diverse panel here of some large international plays, good AI technology, actually AI technology squared, let's say, for both Contract Pod and Amelia, which is good. Excellent. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. And why don't we move on? So the first thing I'll do is I just want to kind of introduce the topic and sort of touch on it a bit. There were 2 interesting things that kind of came up in a recent Gartner study. And one of those was the legal automation. So there was a paper on legal automation a few months back, and it had actually reported that 89% of organizations either met or exceeded their expected ROI on the legal automation technology. So again, very interesting to read that when we know very much that a lot of times when we're speaking to different folks on legal teams, different general counsels, we often find that there's a little bit of a reticence about saying, well, is this really going to pay off? How am I going to position this? And is there a business case for this? And definitely from the Gartner research, it's quite clear that in fact, most of the companies who have been diving into legal automation have found it quite fruitful, and their original estimates of their ROI actually have come to fruition. They've actually come to bear, which is great, which of course leads into that next statistic there that you see on the screen, the 73%. In which case, again, the same Gartner study had asked executives about saying, would you back up or would you be open to investments on in the legal space for your legal department, for example? Does it make sense for your company? And again, the answer that the Gartner study had got back was 73% of executives said yes, that they would actually back that up. And I think also the study went on to a couple of other statements that they had made about how speed, for example, was one of the highest priorities amongst general counsels and amongst the attorneys within the companies. So just getting things out there as quickly as possible. And of course, that old tagline about doing more for less also resonated very, very strongly throughout that paper. So again, very interesting stats, because a lot of times we do feel that in many companies, there is still that feeling that, well, the legal team is more of a cost center. It's not really a business driver, in which case, we have to be cautious about too many asks and such. However, as I said, it does look very much like more and more businesses are coming to the table and saying, no, we are actually prepared to spend some money as long as we see that ROI. And frankly, from that Gartner paper, it looks very, very clear that the ROI definitely is there and it's achievable. Now, with that as a bit of a proviso or a kind of a starter for that data-driven approach on digital transformation, so when we're bringing in automation, for example, I thought it would be great to hear from a general counsel who has actually gone through this process. And so my choice for this was Jerry Levine, because Jerry actually is super friendly to me and basically says yes whenever I ask him to do these crazy things. And so Jerry, could I ask you to kind of jump in here and take us through the journey that Amelia went through when you were kind of you brought in a CLM system. And so just take us through that, the challenges, solution, your results.
Sure. Hopefully I got my mic back on and everyone can hear me.
It sounds good.
So a bit about this. I've actually been through this a number of times. This is even though I've been here for 5 years, this is my fourth, maybe fifth time setting up contract management or dealing with a number of disparate systems that different companies use for contract management. So having dealt with this for a while, there's always, you're always dealing with the same, very similar challenges. One is, and I'm not ashamed to say this, a lot of attorneys are very much stuck in the 90s, and I don't mean the 1990s, I mean the 1890s in terms of how they manage contracts, how they manage law departments, and especially for outside counsel, it's also very hard. One thing this pandemic has shown, by the way, for me at least, is who is a tech savvy and tech forward law firm, law departments, but also shown us who's not so good at that and who's struggling a lot. So when I started here at IPsoft, there was no contract management whatsoever. It was there are still actually giant filing cabinets outside my office filled with paper that no one has touched for a long time. But everything was stored in a folder in an internal SharePoint site that no one can touch. We went forward about 5 years ago. We selected a different vendor that, that seemed to do a job, but it turned out to just be another SharePoint, which led us to ContractPod AI and how better ways to manage this. And what we've seen is that there are significant key things that law departments need to avoid and need to move past.
Yeah.
One, in the pandemic especially, but generally, people are working from home more than ever now, especially, but they need to be able to access what they're working on. Two, you need to be able to collaborate with your peers and oftentimes others outside the organization. And three, we really need to automate all of this. Now, this is funny because I am the general counsel of what is one of the world's leading automation and artificial intelligence companies. Mm-hmm. So automation here is not just for Amelia and for IPsoft. Automation isn't just, we want to automate things. Our job is automating things. That's what our software does. It makes things like that work. And I'm not, one of the things that we've had to get through is how do you automate a process that is very much still a manual review process? And how do we move things forward quicker and easier and more understandably? So what we've done here is solutions like ContractPod AI enable my team and our sales team, our procurement team, our HR teams to access contracts wherever they are, from a cell phone, from a mobile. If you're on the beach, my team constantly has to tell me to stop working because I will work when I'm on vacation. I will work at 3 a.m. and I'll get messages, please go to bed. So what we did was we said our goal is to easily automate the extraction of data from contracts, which was one of my key requirements for any contract management solution. Two, we began with the pandemic especially, but we've been able to move to even more collaborative work through both tools within ContractPod AI, but also tools that are available in other systems. If you're a Google Docs user or a Office 365 user, you can access various tools that allow you to collaborate in real time with your colleagues and your even your outside counsel. I've been able to go in, share a document in Teams and say, if you join the conversation, let's work on this together while we're on the phone so that we can actually see what we're doing. We've been able to bring forward the way we get into and review documents by having a system that shows us our contracts as records, database records, as opposed to just a mess of files. One big issue that we had to overcome previously, of course, was going from actual SharePoint to a SharePoint-like system to ContractPod AI or any sort of digital record-based repository, is you actually get to see documents as one record rather than, oh, we've got 55 copies of a file in here, all of which are named V1, V2, final, really final, truly final, which is, I saw this the other day in another discussion I was having with a bunch of lawyers, how we're terrible at naming documents. So, one said that she had a file on her desktop that was named version 7 final _ really final _ final, which shows you how difficult it is to manage things without a appropriate system. It's not always the easiest thing because people do have their own systems, but by working in this sort of repository where you get to see documents in terms of V1, V2, V3, be able to go back and forth and see changes through the tool, a comparison tool, and all that, really assists in having everybody on the same page, on the same version, and make sure that you're not having an issue where Jane Smith in sales is making changes on V3, meanwhile everybody else is working on V7. Version 7, version 3, of course everybody got that. I shouldn't have to explain that. So what does that lead to ultimately? Of course, I've already got to this point. You do have a better management of your agreement process. Right. You get to see where things have been done in time and maintain an audit trail of the changes. I take this as kind of the typical sales legal fight that everybody wants to talk about, but I do enjoy, and this is I would say that this is negative partisanship right here. I do enjoy when someone says, but we submitted it, and it turns out they submitted it 5 minutes ago when they told someone else they submitted it a week ago.
Yes.
But this is ultimately, and that's just, me taking some delight in somebody else's suffering. I guess that's Schadenfreude. But ultimately, you get to see your documents being updated in near real time and be able to track what's going on, be able to see that. The business, our business teams are able to rely that when they go into the system and download something, they're getting, once they've been notified, the most recent document that they can get. And if there are changes, or it's waiting on a approval process, or if it's out for signature, they can see the status. Internally, we're able to take notes and keep track of what's going on with the documents. We're able to assign things to the appropriate people. And finally, looking at this results column, we're able to go back and say, hey, you know what? We don't need, we spend 5 minutes on this type of document. And, one good thing that we can show is if you're on our paper, if you're on Amelia IPsoft paper, your deal got done in 24 hours. You want to do it on the customer paper? Great, we can do that. But I now can prove in many times that working on that takes significantly longer to close a deal with and one thing that I've heard a lot and that I like to point out is, oh, well, we have to use the customer's paper. It will take a long time. I'm able to show that, other customers have used our paper and taken a much shorter time because we've gotten down to exactly what we need. We're not putting in hundreds of pages of documentation about how to perform a professional service when we're selling software, and you're able to install it by yourself. Is it work every time? Of course not. But the more we're able to show the value of data and how contracts can be managed better through data, better through analytics, and ultimately, look at what is working and what is not working in a document, we're able to drive deals faster, which ultimately keeps everybody happier. I know that I only have a few minutes to talk. So Charles, am I doing okay so far?
You are actually. One of the things that I liked from what you said is it's in fact very topical. Again, is exactly what we're talking about here: data-driven approach to digital transformation. So you've gone through that transformation, and one of the things that you were just mentioning was now you've got the data to be able to kind of show which way is faster. Do you use our paper, that is IPsoft's paper, Amelia's paper, or your customer's paper? And it's really nice that now you're not just guessing at this. You're not saying, well, I think. It's really that you've got statistics behind it, and you can say, well, no, actually, this is the better way to do it, and convince the customer about this, or convince the partner about this, etc. So again, that really puts a lot of good control, or at least it becomes an empirical conversation, not a gut feel conversation, which often derails, I guess, a lot of business.
Right, and I think a big part of that is we have data, but another big part of this is also working well with the other side.
Yeah,
and I think that that one key thing that has to happen no matter what here is internal departments and external lawyers, of course, but internal law departments and our people, you have to work well with the other side's attorneys and procurement team, or if we're purchasing, obviously, you're selling our procurement team and our lawyers.
Yep.
To make sure that this goes smoothly. So that's something beyond the data. One thing we can do, of course, is go and say, look, we actually have data that shows what we've done with other customers.
Yes.
If you need access to that, I'm happy to share with you some reporting or give you an idea of what we've seen. But being able to be open and frank and have that clear discussion is very important.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, the more data you have and the more data we are able to show and extrapolate from and ultimately see where things end up, we're able to move much more quickly. And part of that's because we can see if we're never getting our way on one point, why should we waste time asking for that?
Yeah.
When we know that if we can look at the data and say, hey, we've been able to transform this by going and saying, we don't see this working, but we do know that this point will work.
Yeah.
And most people will accept that. We've not only had a digital transformation, but we've had a human transformation as well in how we're relating with our customers, with our suppliers, and even with our colleagues.
Interesting. I also kind of liked what you said at the beginning, which was that, and in fact, it's almost one of those eye-openers to say, hey, are you telling me that a file share program doesn't work, or a SharePoint doesn't work for all the contracts? Why not? So that was interesting that you kind of even brought that up and saying, yes, here's the complexity of it. How do you name these things? And the fact that they're just files as opposed to being records and such. So good point.
I mean, look, the fact of the matter is I'm a big believer in data-driven, record-based contract management as opposed to document-based contract management.
Right.
And I'm sure some people have. I talk about this a lot. It's one of my favorite things to say is that if you're document-based, you're still going back and reading everything. You have to search through everything. You can't get it out quickly. You can't find it out properly.
Yeah.
If you are not document-based, if you're record-based, you're able to dig in very quickly and find things out. And that is that is ultimately the thing that can speed it up. Because if I can go in and the record has been abstracted, whether by AI or previously we had to do it by manual review, you're able to go in and do that much more quickly and be able to find it, target it, and get out and get the response back quicker. I mean, all of this sounds to me, what I'm saying here is all related to turnaround time, but it's also related to having good data.
Yep, that's great. Excellent. Jerry, thank you very much for kind of sharing with us on your personal and Amelia's journey on that digital journey. Digital transformation journey. So that's excellent. How did it get here?
My pleasure.
Whoops. Let me back back out of there. Let me stop the slide presentation. And what I'd like to do now is maybe what we can do is have a couple of get into the panel session. So having heard what Jared just talked about here's what it looks like to both go on that journey, but then here's what the end goal is like. This is what it's like to kind of already have a system like this. So keep that in mind as I ask you the next couple of questions. First question I'd like to ask is, what are the measurable KPIs when it comes to the digital transformation of in-house legal teams? So what's really important from that perspective? And again, Jerry, since you've been talking about this, why don't I start with you, and then we'll kind of work our way around.
Sure. So I actually just mentioned this, and I do think that the driver for every legal department, what we're constantly told, and this is from conversation with other GCs, heads of legal, CLOs, is everybody's always focused on turnaround. Mm-hmm. And I think turnaround is an easily measurable KPI because you can look at it and say, how long does it take you to turn around the document? Mm-hmm. And you're able to see where there are outliers, where there are other faults, where things have slipped through the crack. All of that is really something that you can find by measuring your turnaround time. Yep. But that has to be compared to length of document, type of document, differences in the scope of, let's say, sale price. So ultimately, if you can measure all of those factors and run them up against each other, mm-hmm. you're in a good place. And so one thing that comes to mind there is it's much quicker to review an NDA than it is to review a 150-page master services agreement. Mm-hmm. And so I personally am not a big fan of legal department SLA service level agreements and measuring on actual, like, did you turn something around in 2 days? Outside of that idea that there has to be some awareness that not every document is the same.
Yeah.
And also that doesn't take into account third-party paper. It doesn't take into account customer counterparty turnaround time. But it's easy to look at it and say, okay, at least on our paper, we have 15-minute turnaround time, and I'm making up numbers.
Right.
We can move around our NDA if it's come back within 5 minutes with a red line, let's say. But if you give me my team received a 22-page non-disclosure agreement, but I don't really understand why it was 22 pages the other day. Mm-hmm. And we started laughing. So but turnaround is your easiest measurable number. Nice. And then you can run that against other data points if you've got it properly recorded in the system. Yeah. Price, whose paper, scope of deal, length of the documents, and all of that. Okay. But I think that's the core one that everybody looks at first is how long and how fast does it take you to complete a transaction? How long does it take you to do a first pass?
Yes, nice. Thank you, Jerry. Ben, can I bump that over to you? So what's your perspective in terms of the measurable KPIs in that digital transformation journey? And specifically, because you've been through this a couple of times as well, in bringing on new big systems, legal automation, CLM systems, et cetera. So what's your perspective? What would be the KPIs that you would recommend?
So we, at the start of the project, we always define our KPIs against value and performance. So the value ones are fairly straightforward. As you raised at the beginning, it's that how quickly you hit your ROI. Are you realizing the savings or the sort of the optimization that you set out to achieve? And those, I think, quite easy because they're quite easy to turn into quantitative data points that we can measure and we can track. I think on the performance side, that's where it's more challenging. I think Jerry gives a great example around turnaround time. It's something where, yes, there is a tangible business benefit, but you're not implementing the technology to make the legal department cheaper or to reduce heads or anything. You're implementing it because you think you can fundamentally improve the quality of the service you're providing to the business. Right. So I think turnaround time is a great one, and we track that really carefully. I think there's a sort of range of other ones. I think depending on the nature of the project, we can often track engagement levels, adoption levels, sort of technology that allows our stakeholders in the business to interact with us via technology. We're able to sort of track how far that's gone, how regularly people use it, how long they spend on sort of certain tasks. So there's a real breadth, but I think the key for us is being really clear what are we tracking because it's having a value benefit, and what are we tracking because it's having a performance quality benefit, and making sure those two stay aligned.
Yes, excellent. Well, thank you, Ben. That's good. And George, you have an opportunity, a little bit of a unique opportunity, both having been, kind of on that side of the legal team where you've worked kind of in industry, and then now you're actually kind of in charge of part of the implementation team, the legal engineering team at ContractPod. And you have a great opportunity to see this in terms of a number of different customers that you're bringing onto new systems. So what's your perspective in terms of the KPIs of kind of pulling the customer along on that digital journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think turnaround time is quite a popular KPI, but also with implementations, quite often we can do KPIs. It's really around adoption. So the fact that you've actually implemented a system will allow you to suddenly gain greater governance and transparency of what's going on. So you can build KPIs around that. And then really it's driving adoption as well. Because by showing that people are using the system, again, you're showing that there's greater control, greater transparency, the collection of the data. You've got all those benefits that are coming simply through the adoption process. And that's something certainly as a software company, it's very straightforward and simple for us to provide those type of data and statistics to help people.
When you say adoption, though, it's not just the legal team's adoption that you're talking about. You're talking about, like, is the rest of the organization using?
Yeah. Well, exactly. So it's numbers of users across the business. You can also look at it. It's simply numbers of contracts going through the system. Yeah. And through that, you can then provide greater governance. So you can provide KPIs around the governance piece, compliance, risk analysis that you can then provide, because you simply have the data and the documents somewhere where you can then do that analysis, whereas previously that would just simply have not been possible.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good. I mean, basically in terms of the KPIs, what we heard were, turnaround time's pretty important, a number of other factors, the more common ones, I suppose, the ROI, the savings, optimization, was there time savings? But then another really good one that George, you brought up there was the adoption. And adoption, not just in the legal department, but actually within the rest of the organization as well. So again, pretty key points. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, number two, or my next question, what is the most common timeline for achieving optimal results? And can you give us any examples or from your legal teams, et cetera? Ben, do you think I might start with you on that side? What would you say in terms of optimal results? We're on this digital transformation journey. What are you going to tell your more senior management to say, here's the timeline that we're going to have for this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because I think if you're unrealistic about that, or you fundamentally get it wrong, I think you make your implementation and adoption program a lot more difficult. My sense is that, or at least the policy we've always adopted here, is that we budget for a year to 2 years to get this sort of thing fully adopted and fully implemented and working, and that's the period over which we'd be tracking it and carefully making sure that we're staying on target. But we want to be showing benefits much faster than that. So I think we try and structure our program so that within the first 4 to 6 weeks, we're starting to show some benefit, even if it's a proof of concept or a pilot, but we're able to bring our users and our stakeholders on that journey with us so that they can see what it is we're doing, why they should buy into it, it's exciting, it's positive, and then structure it such that the benefits continue to trickle through, so that there's sort of, every month that passes, we're able to show some progress, we're able to offer some functionality, we're able to offer something that keeps people bought in and wanting to participate. So although I would say, these things take time, you have to be realistic. Definitely we've realized that the more you can stagger those benefits and bring people with you, ultimately the overall timeline will be shorter, and I think the overall success is likely to be greater.
So in other words, kind of a quick deployment schedule is pretty important, or at the very least to have some kind of a phased approach to be able to really kind of capitalize on the momentum
That's exactly it. And I think that initial deployment can be very basic. I think there's a temptation when you know what you're trying to achieve and there's something exciting in that end goal. I think there's a temptation to try to get to there immediately. But those initial things, yeah, super basic, but just enough to keep people bought in and interested.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You're right. I think whenever you're thinking about a large project, I think it's really easy to think not in an agile way but kind of in a more structured way of thinking. It's going to be all or nothing, and it's coming in, and it's going to be a year before we get this. But then again, you're right. That whole, I think at the beginning of the project is when you've got most of the team is really excited about it. They're interested. They're keen to kind of get started. So good, really good point. George, you've had the opportunity again to speak to a lot of clients on this, and in fact, I think you've even done some expedited deployments. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest changes at the moment is that we historically with legal IT, it was the delivery of a software package, and
yes,
on go live date, the software company would disappear and the legal team would be stuck with a new system that they would quite often very quickly fall out of love with, and it would never achieve what it was supposed to achieve. Right. One of the benefits of moving towards a software as a service type provision is that you get that ongoing relationship with the software provider. Mm. And that's very important because it allows, as Ben was saying, that phased approach and the expansion of use and functionality for the system. And we certainly look at that normally over a 2-year period. And that's 2 years from go live date. So as Ben will say, there will normally be some very quick, easy wins that we can do, but then it's a matter of growing the system with the users. So as they get familiar with certain parts of the system, you can then bring in additional functionality and grow the use and again, grow the adoption through that. Yeah. Nowadays, with a lot of the IT, it's got so much functionality that if you go big bang, people simply won't use half of it and they'll get fed up with the other half because it doesn't do everything that they want. Yes. So it's much more of a phased approach that we certainly take with clients.
That's great. Well, thank you, George, for that perspective. And Jerry, what is your sense in terms of that, in terms of the timeline for optimal results from the system?
I was going to say, I think that it does also depend on the size of the organization and how many people have to be involved in general.
Yeah.
We're a mid-sized business. We're not nearly as big as Fujitsu, but I still would put it in about. I may not go 1 to 2 years, but I'd say 6 to 12, 15 months. You've got to be working on this for people to really see it.
Yeah.
You see some results very quickly, but there are other results that take a much longer time to show up. And of course, this goes back to what I was saying about data, where as you're getting information in, you've got to develop enough data. In the judge whether or not you're seeing results.
Yes, excellent. All right, good. Thank you, Jerry. Now, how much clarity or visibility does the industry have in terms of determining the impact of technology deployment? And again, by industry, of course, we're talking about the legal space, corporate legal. So with that, George, would you kind of share your thoughts first?
Yeah, I think there is certainly increasing amount of clarity and visibility now. The software companies are becoming a lot better at helping GCs set KPIs and then providing the data that then shows that these goals are being hit to show that implementation is going and is being successful. One thing that we're very aware of is that GCs aren't naturally salesmen. So that's something which the software company can help with, selling the IT across the business and also selling the success of that and how you can put that in terms of KPIs as well. So from a financial perspective, return on investment, that perspective as well. So I think it is something which is increasing that clarity. It's still got some way to go, but I think it's certainly something which is improving.
Okay, it's an improvement. It's not a black box anymore. Jerry, any thoughts on that in terms of kind of clarity, in terms of the visibility, within the industry of technology deployment?
I think that there's still a lot of learning to be done in the legal technology industry, as far as it goes, serving in-house counsel and so on. And I think that there are contract management, all these new tools are coming out. There's a ton of different companies approaching from different ways. And what needs to be shown is that what is going to best benefit internally. And one thing that I think, and going to what I think George just said, is not every GC is also a salesperson.
Right.
They're not always able. They can understand how it benefits, but they may not be able to express it to the rest of their leadership team or to others within the organization. So I think what we're starting to see is a lot of enthusiasm for technological solutions. Mm-hmm. But there's also a lot of people who feel burned by prior attempts, and that's just one of the issues that I think legal tech vendors have to face. I think the one thing that comes out that we don't often think about, because lawyers think about privilege, but we don't always think about the security of information. So I think the complexity of implementation is often ignored, but also the compliance with various security rules and requirements of organizations that may not exist in obviously it exists because you don't want to divulge your client's information, but some of the benefits that lawyers have as a profession still have to be approached by the vendors. But I think clarity is improving. Yeah. I've had less, do you actually know what we do speeches, or how does this actually help me in the past year or so than I did when I first started here at Amelia IPsoft 5 years ago.
Yeah, interesting. It's quite interesting what you said there about that maybe a lot of GCs or a lot of legal folk have been burned in the past by previous attempts that didn't work out and stuff. Let me dig into that just a tiny bit. Like, what is the biggest recommendation you have to say, hey, here's the way not to get burned, or vendors, this is really what you should be doing for clients?
I mean, I think, and I believe Ben mentioned this earlier, is one, we really do need to be able to see how it works with a subset of data. Mm-hmm. We're a software company. We do pilots for our customers to see how it works. Yeah. At least just telling me that your option is a free trial is not going to work for a law department.
Right.
Because we actually want to see that, but also understand what the tools are that the teams are using. A lot of companies use Salesforce. I think, and speaking about contract management only right now, mm-hmm. if you're not able to support a Salesforce integration, or you don't have some way of pulling information back and forth, I would say that's becoming table stakes.
Yep.
And I think one issue that, again, talking about contract lifecycle management vendors, things that were very important that got sold as a benefit 5 years ago are, again, table stakes. If you're not doing automatic OCR, if you're not able to search within all the files, if you're not able to do that, that's just things that your software should do out of the box today.
Right.
Yep. Where I think you see the burning, and where GCs and legal technology professionals are once bitten, twice shy, yep. is there are a lot of vendors out there. It is hard to make a choice.
Yes.
And you really need there's going to be what we need is a better way. And I think certain organizations like Clock and the ACC Legal Ops are working on this, better ways to actually vet and figure out what you need as an organization based on your level in the legal tech timeline.
Mm-hmm.
But vendors have to be aware and do their due diligence on the customer as well. If you're processing 30,000 contracts a month,
Mm-hmm.
your needs for contract management software are quite a bit different than someone who sees 5 contracts a month.
Yeah.
And a one-size-fit-all application doesn't actually fit anybody.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, working very closely, collaboratively with the vendor, I suppose, is probably the key, making sure that they really understand what is it that I'm after. So I think that's pretty critical as well. And that frankly comes from another conversation that you and I had in the previous where you had made some recommendations to another GC saying, hey, one of the first places to start is make sure you really understand what you're getting here. So pretty important. Excellent. Thank you. Ben, what's your perspective on the visibility, on determining these systems, on technology deployments?
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with everything that's been said previously. I think historically this has been quite a weak area, and I think everyone's wising up and it's getting much better.
Yes.
I think people have been burnt. My view is that the vendors need to be really transparent about what the software does and doesn't do, and they need to really embrace pilots and want to engage in that.
Yeah.
But I think on the corporate legal side, I think people need to not look at software as a magic wand, and they need to sort of properly stop and engage with it and understand the nuts and bolts, because it's very tempting to sort of buy the magic wand argument, but you probably won't see the value of what you're purchasing if you don't give it that degree of engagement that it really merits. So it all comes down to pilots for me. If a really well executed pilot with everyone fully bought in and committed, I think the prospects of it then being a success is so much greater.
Excellent. That's a really good suggestion. Thank you for that. Good. Let me take a moment now at this stage. If I can ask the audience a question, and then let's kind of just reflect on that for a moment, and then we'll continue with a couple more questions and then bring this to a close. So I'm going to open up the polling right now. So I'm going to start the polling. And the question that we have here is, how long do you think it takes to recoup a financial investment in legal digital transformation? So again, talking about legal digital transformation, how long does it take to recoup your financial investment? And then we've got less than a year, 1 to less than 2 years, 2 to less than 3 years, and 3 years plus. And if you can start now, that would be great. And again, the audience should have the ability to just click on one of those buttons to select. I'll give everybody a moment or two. There we go. Okay, wonderful. I started to think that my system had frozen. There wasn't seeing any activity there, so that's good. So a number of people are now starting, and we're just going to give it another moment or two. And again, the big question is, how long does it take to recoup? Or do you think that it takes to recoup a financial investment in legal digital transformation? All right. And I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1, and now. All right. Excellent. And the results, let me see. I'm not sure if I can show the results. Hopefully you're seeing this on the screen, but the results that I'm seeing are basically, it's a little bit of an even split between less than 1 year and 1 to 2 years. So about 28% each. So about a third of the audience on both of those almost. And then we're talking about 2 to 3 years. 42% of the audience agreed there. And 3 years plus, nobody said, nobody selected that one. So at least that's good to know that it's not a long-term solution. And I think modern society basically is not into really long-term plays anymore, I think. So that's kind of reflected there. Interesting, 2 to 3 years. Panelists, what do you guys think? Does that sort of resonate with you guys? Anyone, Jerry?
I was going to say, yeah, and again, this goes to what I think we've just mentioned, and Ben just mentioned as well, that you're looking at, it depends on the scale, the size of your organization, and how quickly people are willing to adapt and move with it.
Yeah.
As well as, one of the most difficult parts of any organization, which is training.
Right. Yeah.
But I think this makes sense. But I think a good question is, what is the size of your organization? And going back to these data points, looking at this, is the investment is if you're a very small organization, you can recoup the investment in less than a year. If you are if you're a huge business, a huge corporation, you could be looking 2 years, 3 years before you really start seeing the true recovery from this.
And any perspective from your side, given that you're with a mega big organization, Fujitsu is huge and it's dispersed around the globe, multinational. What's your perspective on that?
The expectation here is that it's less than a year or 1 year. So
yes,
for us, it's a question of structuring things in such a way that we can deliver to that 1 year return on investment. Because if we're going outside of that, that's kind of breaking the corporate expectations, and you've got a much more difficult job to sell it internally and get people bought in.
So that really kind of emphasizes that point that was brought up earlier about doing some kind of a quick deployment model, or at least doing it in phases so that you can show some results immediately, show some ROI right away. That's good. That's really good. George, have you ever had any conversations with some of our clients along that side?
Yes, I think normally it's they're looking at the 1 to 2 years. That's certainly how we will normally look at it from a implementation perspective.
Yeah.
And try and, let's say, with the more phased approach on implementation, and to drive adoption over that period to make sure that ROI is hit within that. Okay. So that's certainly where we would look.
Okay, so 1 to 2 years. So it does sort of kind of span that time frame, anywhere from less than a year, which sounds like a pretty aggressive, but necessary kind of thing in our new environment, to like 2 to 3 years where most of the audience is kind of focusing in on. And anyway, interesting. Another question for you is, what are corporate legal teams looking for today, specifically on that digital transformation journey? Is there anything that kind of really resonates as saying, hey, this is what I needed when I started that journey? And again, Ben, maybe I can start with you on this one.
So for us, it's definitely being able to enhance the quality of the services we're providing for the business. It's moving the legal team out of just being the guys who do red lines and turn documents, and into sort of that close business advisors who can bring that extra dimension, that insight, that analysis that takes you beyond just signing contracts and allows you to sort of, the predictive analytics, the sort of insight to the business in a way that a CEO and CFO wouldn't have without that particular set of specialisms. So all around quality and insight, and kind of stepping ourselves up to being true sort of trusted advisors to the business.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. And George, any thoughts there?
Yeah, it's very much around looking at the wider picture. A lot of people are already partly digital, so it's where they are in the journey, and quite often they'll have different systems doing different pieces. So it's, for a lot of them, it's actually what are the missing pieces in the puzzle, which bits are we now looking for, but also how do we simplify this? Quite often we hear that, for example, legal teams will have several different repositories for documents, and they just want to pull it together in one central repository, again, to gain that. Also for Contract AI and my team in particular, one particular focus is around the AI capabilities, as Ben was saying, the predictive analytics and the ability to extract the information out of the documents once they're in the repository. So it's those areas where we're probably seeing the greatest interest and take up.
Okay. And Jerry, when you started your journey, what has been kind of the top of mind for you in terms of your legal team saying this is what we need?
I think for the legal team, I think it's being able to work collaboratively and ensure that our delivery of our service to the rest of the bigger team here is improved and ultimately a positive experience for them. But there's also a strategic and tactical standpoint that we take, that we're able to better guide the deal making, and being able to, look at a bigger picture as part of this transformation, rather than how does this one deal affect us, to does this deal affect other things going on at the company? Does it affect other sales? And then be able to advise on both a big picture and a direct sale, and on the specific deal going forward, has been a big part of where we've gone to with this.
Okay, that's good. All right, one last question, gentlemen, which is the data-driven approach to digital transformation. What is your one takeaway that you would like to share with the audience, share with another GC out there, to say, if you were going to start this journey, this is the big thing. This is the one thing you got to focus on. What's your one key takeaway? And again, maybe Ben, why don't I start with you on that one again too?
I think the key bit of advice I give is start with the basics. Get your foundational data right. Understand what's in your contracts. Get your real basics, and then start building up from there and move up the complexity curve. Because I think there's a temptation to go straight to the sort of cutting edge top of the complexity. But if you haven't got your basic building blocks and know from a sort of data perspective what's happening in your organization, it's really hard to then sustainably build that digital transformation. So I'd say, start with the basics and be really careful to bring your stakeholders with you.
And stakeholders, that's pretty important. Okay, that's good. Jerry, what are your thoughts on that? The one big.
Can I just take what Ben said and just repeat it? But beyond,
you could do that as long as you add something at the end.
Okay, so I do think that's a big key part of this, is know what you're basically trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
If what you are trying to transform is your department, if your transformation is around delivery, if your transformation is around knowing what's in the documents, what is your goal? Because different approaches your approach will change depending on what you're trying to do with the document. If you're trying to automate and get legal out of the way, you want to focus on template development, automated review, and build that first. If you're trying to grab hold of 20 years of documents that have never been in a system, your focus is on migration and analysis and analytics. So I think for anybody who would be starting this today, or looking at this, go through what you're trying to accomplish. What's your core goal? Is it process management? Is it workflow management? Is it predictive? Is it analytics? Is it automation? Is it document generation?
Yeah.
And go from there, and then build a solution. Build a solution, or select your solution, or figure out how you're going to implement this from that lens, because that's going to drive the rest of the process.
Nice. Yeah, that's great advice. Absolutely. Know what your goals are, and kind of get your mind wrapped around that first, which is a really, really good sound piece of advice. And George, having seen a number of these implementations, what is your piece of advice that you would say, hey, this is the one thing that you need to think about?
Yeah, I think it is know what your goals are. And we've all talked about phased implementation and not the big bang. So what do you want? What are your easy hits? And then what is going to come further down the line? And I think that's something which we found recently with COVID, for example, it clarified for a lot of people what their first up targets were, which was typically central repository, which everybody can access remotely, was the number one, because that's what they needed to carry on working.
Wow.
So it's work out what your KPIs are, work out what your goals are, and then basically get out there and talk to software people, software companies like us. So, and in doing that, look for ones who are talking about staying with you through that transformation journey as well, because I think that's very important. So it's somebody a company who's willing to work with you over that implementation period, that phase period.
Right.
That I think is very important.
Yeah, that's good advice. I mean, so basically on this last part, the key takeaways, focus on the basics, and well, frankly, know what your goals are so that you can focus on the basics that you need done. So that was excellent advice there too. Then the idea of phased implementation, interesting that it came up a couple of times in our conversation. Very important aspect there to be able to show progress quickly, gain that momentum, get that momentum going. And then frankly, good point also, George, in terms of just having there somebody who's kind of hand-holding through the process, which is pretty important too. And I have heard of a number of complaints against software vendors. A lot of times it's easy for a software vendor to think, very tunnel vision, thinking that I sell software, I gave you the software, we sold you the software, good luck, you're on your own. Make it happen. And, rather than kind of going through the implementation. So again, good advice there. Make sure that you know what you're buying and you really need a solution, not just a piece of software. So with that, let me just jump one more slide that I wanted to show, which is for anybody in the audience, if you'd like a little bit more information on the digital transformation process, we do have a free ebook, which is the 3 stages of legal digital transformation. It has been very popular. You'll find it down here. There's a little bit.ly link to it, so that's easy enough to jot down. And with that, what I would like to say is thank you to everybody. Thank you to the panelists, Ben, Jerry, George, for joining me and for having a fascinating conversation about a data-driven digital transformation approach to your legal departments. And again, congratulations on gentlemen that you guys actually have implemented. George, in your case, you've implemented a whole bunch of them. So again, bringing this up and live is certainly a big accomplishment. And again, really, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your experiences with the rest of the audience and here at Contract Pod as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.